The instant you begin justifying your limits to someone who routinely ignores them, something quiet but significant takes place. You believe you are being thoughtful, level-headed, composed. What you are actually doing is showing them precisely how much you are prepared to put up with. And the people who do not deserve your patience do not fail to understand your limits. They measure them. They observe how many times you will repeat the same thing. They calculate how little it costs them to step past your line. And when that cost is low enough, they will step past it again without hesitation. Consider how many times you have returned to a conversation in your mind afterward. I should have chosen my words more carefully. I should have made myself clearer. I should have kept a steadier tone. But nothing ever changes, because the problem was never the way you expressed yourself. The problem was what you were hoping for. Stoicism presents an idea that is both unsettling and deeply liberating. Your responsibility is to your own conduct, not to persuading others to acknowledge it. You govern your response, not how much respect they choose to extend. The moment you stop trying to negotiate your own dignity is the moment something in you begins to return to its proper place. If you are here, some part of you has grown weary of performing strength and is ready to actually inhabit it. If you want clarity that carries no cruelty, limits that carry no resentment, and discipline that produces no spectacle, you are exactly where you need to be. Disrespect is rarely accidental. It is a form of measurement. When someone consistently interrupts you, makes quiet jokes at your expense in public, treats your perspective as irrelevant, or nudges at your limits in ways that seem small but feel deliberate, they are not simply thoughtless. They are gathering data. They are running a quiet experiment. The question they are asking without ever speaking it is, how much space do I have with this person? And the answer they receive comes entirely from how you respond. Most people operate under the assumption that disrespect is emotional, that it emerges from frustration, misunderstanding, or a bad day. Sometimes that is true, but far more often it is calculated. It is a measured probe designed to test the level of resistance in front of it. When there is no resistance, the probe becomes more aggressive the next time. Think of the last moment someone crossed a genuine line with you. Perhaps they spoke over you without acknowledgement. Perhaps they turned something personal you shared into material for a laugh. Perhaps they made you feel diminished in the presence of other people. What did you do in that moment? Did the heat rise in your chest and come out as anger? Did you attempt a careful explanation, hoping that enough clarity would finally produce the respect you deserved? Or did your eyes drop and you said nothing, hoping the moment would dissolve on its own? Every single response teaches them something. Anger communicates emotional investment, that they can reach you. Silence communicates conflict avoidance, that they can continue without consequence. Lengthy explanation communicates that you require their validation, and the need for approval is the simplest lever anyone can pull. Much of what hurts in these moments is not only the act of disrespect itself, but the story you construct about what it signifies. That story determines your reaction, and your reaction becomes the instruction manual they study and return to. Need is leverage. The moment another person senses that you require them to see you as reasonable, worthy, or good, the balance of the exchange tilts toward them. You may genuinely believe that if you can only articulate your position clearly enough, respect will follow. But if respect had ever been a function of clear explanation, it would already be present. When you over-explain, you do not reinforce your limit. You reveal that it is negotiable. You are signaling without meaning to that your line can be moved through discussion. This is why the disrespect continues. It is not a result of confusion. It is a result of information you provided. The more consistently you react in expected ways, the more predictable your responses become. And predictability transfers control to the person holding the test. This is the point at which a quiet shift begins to occur internally. Rather than responding like someone being evaluated, you begin to observe like someone conducting the evaluation. You start identifying patterns. You stop asking why they are doing this to you and begin asking what they are attempting to extract: a reaction, superiority, dominance, attention. Once you can see the pattern, your emotional temperature changes. You are no longer caught inside the moment. You have stepped just outside of it, watching it with some distance. When you pause, even for a handful of seconds, you interrupt the test. You stop supplying immediate data. That pause contains real strength. Not the kind that announces itself, but the quiet kind that requires nothing from anyone in order to exist. When someone delivers a cutting remark and you do not rush to protect yourself, something shifts beneath the surface. You are not yielding. You are assessing, deciding whether what was just said deserves to enter your inner world at all. When you genuinely understand this, something about disrespect begins to lose its edge. It stops functioning as injury and starts functioning as information. The person probing you is revealing something about their own nature far more than they are saying anything definitive about yours. The discomfort does not vanish entirely because sometimes their words find their way to a soft place you already carry. That is precisely why certain things sting while others pass without registering. Carl Jung wrote that everything in others that irritates us has the potential to lead us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves. When someone's disrespect lands with unusual force, it frequently touches a wound that has not yet been fully attended to. Recognizing that is not an admission of fragility. It is a form of clarity. If you know where your sensitive areas are, you become far more difficult to manipulate. You no longer react from surprise. You respond from awareness. The real change is therefore not about developing sharper responses. It is about shifting your internal posture. You stop walking into interactions hoping to receive validation. You stop assuming that fairness is built into the situation. You begin to understand social exchanges as transfers of energy. When someone disrespects you, they are proposing a transaction. They provoke in order to receive a reaction. If you offer them anger, apology, or desperation, the transaction succeeds. They leave the exchange feeling confirmed in their approach. But when you respond with composed observation or with simple stated fact, the transaction fails. The energy they expected does not materialize. That absence carries more weight than any rebuttal ever could. This is not about becoming indifferent or withdrawn. It is about becoming intentional. You choose when to engage and when to step back. You respond with what is factual rather than what is charged. If someone claims you never contribute, you state what you have contributed. If someone tells you that you are too sensitive, you acknowledge their view without absorbing it as truth. You are not trying to persuade them. You are not trying to prevail. You are simply holding your position without drama. Over time, this consistent approach changes how you are perceived. The test stops producing a reward, and this is where the deeper pattern becomes visible. Disrespect only sustains itself where it continues to find a point of entry. When you stop reacting automatically, when you stop defending your value, when you stop requiring the other person to recognize what you already know about yourself, the dynamic begins to shift. It may not transform overnight. They may press harder initially, checking whether the old response has only been temporarily suspended. But when your internal posture holds steady, the script breaks. You are no longer following the one they wrote for you. You are authoring your own. And once you begin responding from the position of the examiner rather than the examined, the test loses its authority over you. The first internal movement is toward what might be called clinical detachment. Not coldness, not cruelty, detachment. These are distinct from one another, and the distinction matters. Coldness is the shutting down of feeling. Cruelty is the desire to inflict pain in return. Detachment is the capacity to observe what is happening without being consumed by it, to step half a pace back within your own mind and watch the exchange rather than be swallowed by it. Picture a researcher standing in a laboratory watching a reaction unfolding inside a sealed container. The solution changes color, the temperature rises, the reaction intensifies, but the researcher does not become alarmed. They do not take it as a personal affront. They observe, they record, and they adjust based on what the data shows. That is the internal orientation you are developing. The next time someone treats you with disrespect, notice the first impulse that arrives. The instinctive question the mind reaches for is, how could they do this to me? But that question places you at the center of the storm and keeps you there. Replace it gently with a different one. What are they attempting to get from this? Attention, a sense of superiority, control, a predictable emotional response? When you redirect your attention from your own wounded feelings to the mechanics of what is actually happening, something measurable changes. The emotional charge drops. You begin to see the behavior as a strategic pattern rather than as a targeted attack on your worth. And once you can see it as strategy, you can respond to it strategically. This is where steadiness begins. When you stop seeing the other person as an adversary and start seeing them as a pattern. Patterns are predictable. Patterns can be observed. Patterns can be managed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the power he possessed was over his own mind, not over external circumstances, and that recognizing this was where genuine strength was found. That strength does not argue. It does not demonstrate itself. It simply declines to give up the interior space where choices are made. Disrespect may still arrive, but it no longer governs your response. There is a paradox concealed in this approach. The moment you cease requiring others to understand you, you become considerably harder to provoke. When their validation is no longer something you need, their words lose the hook they previously had. Many conflicts endure because one party is hungry for acknowledgement, to be seen as right, reasonable, or fair. That hunger is genuinely human. It is also leverage. When someone senses your need for their recognition, they hold something over you. When you genuinely release that need, the balance shifts. You are no longer negotiating for respect. You are simply determining how much access someone receives. This is not passivity. Detachment is not absence of response. It is response with full awareness behind it. Epictetus said that the only territory you truly govern is your own reaction. When voices rise around you, yours descends. When someone creates drama, you meet it with stated fact. When someone throws accusations, you assess them calmly before deciding whether they warrant any response at all. The power is not located in the specific words you select. It lives in the stillness that generates those words. This steadiness will feel unfamiliar at first. You are accustomed to responding quickly, to protecting yourself, to explaining your intentions. Clinical detachment interrupts that reflex. It inserts a pause. Within that pause, vision sharpens. You begin to recognize the recurring moves, the same provocations repackaged, the same triggers deployed, the same attempts to pull you into a role you did not agree to play. Jung observed that what remains unconscious will continue to direct your life, and you will experience that direction as misfortune. Many people believe their recurring conflicts are simply a pattern of bad luck. In reality, they are patterns of unconscious response. When you make the pattern conscious, you can step outside of it. There is one aspect of detachment that most people find genuinely unsettling. When the expected reaction disappears, the other person does not quietly accept it. They escalate. When the familiar response is no longer forthcoming, they apply more pressure. It is the same impulse that causes someone to press an elevator button repeatedly when it does not illuminate. The first press seems reasonable. The second is firmer. The third is almost forceful. Only when the person is fully convinced that nothing is happening do they stop and reconsider their approach. People operate by this same pattern. When someone accustomed to extracting emotional reactions from you suddenly finds nothing available, they do not withdraw immediately. They increase the intensity, louder language, sharper accusations, more heightened behavior. The escalation is not evidence that detachment has failed. It is evidence that the old reward structure is beginning to collapse. The pattern is searching for the payoff it previously received. This phase requires real discipline. If you revert to your old response during the escalation, the test resets completely. The pattern absorbs one lesson, apply more pressure, and the previous response returns. But if you hold steady, something in the system changes. The person begins to sense, though they may never name it, that the former dynamic is no longer available. The hooks are not catching. The intensity begins losing its momentum. Detachment also protects your interior from a particular kind of damage. When you react impulsively, you tend to revisit the moment afterward, turning over what you should have said, what you wish you had done differently. Detachment reduces that internal noise significantly. You responded from intention. Even if the other person remains unchanged, you retain full possession of your self-respect. Over time, this posture stops requiring effort to maintain. It becomes the natural way you inhabit interactions. You listen. You assess. You decide. Disrespect may continue to appear, but it no longer shapes the interaction. You are no longer in combat with chaos. You are studying it. And when you study something long enough, you begin to see that the real power was never located in changing the other person. It was always in the mastery of your own response. When the old pattern stops producing results, it does not dissolve quietly. It intensifies. Consider how the dynamic previously operated. They activated guilt and you offered apology. They provoked and you engaged in argument. They criticized and you moved quickly to defend yourself. Every response you provided confirmed that the approach was working. It gave them momentum. It gave them something to use. But when you withdraw the reaction, when calm replaces heat, something in the system fractures. The familiar loop stops delivering what it was built to produce. And when a pattern stops delivering, it does not retire gracefully. It pushes harder. This is not failure on your part. It is a mechanical response to a disrupted reward system. Old rumors may resurface. Past mistakes may be reintroduced into conversation. You may be characterized as distant, self-absorbed, or indifferent. The tone sharpens. The pressure increases. And this is precisely the moment when most people fold. They misread the escalation as confirmation that something has gone wrong. They conclude, I made this worse. I should return to what I was doing before. But look at it clearly. You did not make it worse. You made it stop working. The pattern is struggling to survive in the absence of what sustained it. The emotional difficulty of this phase is real. The intensity increases, and the nervous system responds by seeking relief as rapidly as possible. Apologizing, explaining, or re-engaging in argument may calm the immediate surface, but it also teaches the pattern that it only needed more pressure to retrieve the old reaction. Marcus Aurelius wrote as a reminder to himself that the best response to an adversary is to refuse to become like them. Remaining composed during escalation is not about some form of retaliation. It is about refusing to mirror the chaos being placed in front of you. It is about preserving your own character when external pressure is at its highest. There is something genuinely clarifying about recognizing that escalation is predictable. It stops feeling like a personal attack and begins feeling like a mechanical process. Jung observed that what you resist tends to persist. When you meet the behavior with emotional force, you supply it with fuel. When you meet it with restraint and factual response, you starve it. This does not mean remaining in situations that are genuinely harmful or tolerating behavior that crosses into abuse. It means that in the heat of the specific moment, you refuse to deliver the exact reaction the other person came looking for. You remain centered. You use plain language. You keep your engagement to what is concrete and factual. And when withdrawal is the appropriate response, you step back without theater. Epictetus said that the person who does not govern themselves is not free. Freedom in this context has nothing to do with commanding others. It is the mastery of your own impulses when pressure mounts. Anyone can maintain composure when circumstances are easy. The genuine test arrives when accusations are loud and emotion is running high. The composure you maintain in those conditions sends a signal more powerful than any argument could, that your conduct is no longer dictated by someone else's emotional state, and that your limits do not require their agreement in order to hold. Seneca wrote that whoever angers you has conquered you. In the context of escalating pressure, that is not a philosophical observation. It is practical guidance. If the pressure rises and you lose your footing, the old pattern recovers its ground. If the pressure rises and you stay anchored, the pattern begins to break apart. It takes time. It requires repetition. But human behavior adjusts when the reward disappears. Eventually, the effort of pressing the same button over and over becomes exhausting with nothing to show for it. The other person either shifts their approach or redirects their energy towards someone who still provides the expected response. This period can feel isolating because you are interrupting a familiar rhythm. There will be moments of self-doubt. There will be a sense of being misread. But something else grows in that space. You begin to recognize, with increasing clarity, how many of your previous reactions were actually attempts to restore comfort rather than genuine expressions of strength. Real stability, you start to understand, is quiet. It does not perform. It does not require recognition. It simply remains where it is. And a further realization follows. The escalation is not only about the other person. Your own patterns of habit protest when you begin changing them. The mind reaches for the familiar script because familiarity feels like safety. Staying composed during escalation is as much about conditioning your own responses as it is about anything the other person is doing. With each intentional, grounded response, a new pattern strengthens inside you. At this point, your response becomes simpler, not louder. You reduce it to what is factual. Disrespect sustains itself on emotion. It thrives on charged language, words designed not to describe behavior, but to define identity. Words like selfish, dramatic, incompetent, impossible. These are not observations. They are hooks. They are designed to be grabbed, to provoke a defensive pull in the opposite direction. When you engage with labels by arguing against them, you have already accepted their frame. You are no longer discussing what happened. You are negotiating your identity. And that negotiation has no flaw. Rather than meeting adjectives with argument, meet them with what is verifiable. If someone says you never take responsibility for anything, the impulse is to produce a comprehensive account of every time you did. But that list carries emotional energy, and emotional energy is what the exchange is feeding on. A more grounded response is short and concrete. State what occurred. Leave it there. No elevation in tone, no defensiveness in posture. Just reality offered plainly. If someone characterizes you as excessively sensitive, you do not analyze your emotional history or defend the legitimacy of your feelings. You pause. You meet their gaze steadily. You say simply, "That is your perspective." And then you return your attention to wherever it was before the comment arrived. The energy dissipates because you declined to participate in the confrontation that was prepared for you. Notice precisely what occurred in that exchange. You did not absorb the label as truth. You also did not retaliate with a counter-label. You stepped outside the emotional current entirely. Without friction feeding it, the fire loses what it needs to sustain itself. Most prolonged arguments continue only because both parties keep supplying the fuel. When one person withdraws their supply, the combustion weakens on its own. This is not the suppression of your voice. It is the exercise of judgment about when and how your voice serves you. There is authority in restraint. There is genuine power in declining to argue about who you are. This approach can seem almost too plain to be effective, and that simplicity is precisely why it works. Elaborate defenses, dramatic rebuttals, pointed sarcasm. These are signals that something internal remains unsettled. They reveal investment. When your response is brief and measured, it signals that you are not unsettled. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that distress arising from anything external does not originate in the thing itself. It originates in the judgment you form about the thing. When someone directs a label at you, the disturbance begins in your interpretation of that label. If you receive it as a verdict, it produces a strong reaction. If you receive it as noise, you remain where you were. Even so, certain words still land with weight. That is where a deeper layer of the work begins. Why does a straightforward insult sometimes feel like it is assessing your entire worth? Why do particular phrases continue to echo after the conversation has ended? The honest answer is rarely about the present moment in isolation. It is about uncertainty that was already there. Quiet fears, unexamined insecurities that predate the person speaking. Recognizing this is not the same as agreeing with what was said. It is becoming aware of your own interior territory. If someone accuses you of being incompetent and the accusation settles in your mind for days, examine which part of you already held that doubt. If someone suggests you are undeserving of connection and it shakes something fundamental in you, notice where that fear was already living before they spoke. The insult is a trigger, not the origin. Once you can see that clearly, the words begin losing their authority. They are no longer defining you. They are pointing at something that was already present and that still needs your attention. Epictetus said that the reaction, including what you choose to believe, is within your governance. When you have genuine clarity about your own strengths and your own areas of growth, you become far less vulnerable to being destabilized by someone else's characterization of you. Where their criticism contains something accurate, you can address it from within, quietly and without drama. Where it contains nothing accurate, you can release it without effort. The determining factor in both cases is your own interior assessment, not the pressure of their delivery. Here is the part that is most difficult to acknowledge. Sometimes the insult lands so hard because some quiet part of you wonders if it might be true. No one particularly enjoys admitting that. If a stranger passing you on the street said something completely absurd about your character, it would register as strange at most. It would not stay with you. But when a particular insult remains in your thoughts long after the conversation has ended, its persistence has less to do with the force of what was said than with the resonance it found inside you. The sting originates not only in their voice, it finds its echo in your own. Most people define strength as the capacity to produce the ideal response. The cutting remark delivered with precision, the composure that looks effortless, the posture that signals confidence. But the more substantial form of strength is less visible. It is interior clarity. When someone's words cause genuine pain, the question worth sitting with is not how to respond to them. It is what part of you responded so intensely. Was it the fear that you are fundamentally insufficient? The fear of being permanently excluded? The fear that others see a weakness you have been working to conceal? The insult did not place those fears inside you. It found the ones that were already there. And once you see that, the entire situation reorients. You are no longer simply in an exchange with the other person. You are encountering something in yourself that has been waiting for your honest attention. People who consistently rely on disrespect, whether or not they are conscious of doing so, have a particular sensitivity to where insecurity lives in others. They experiment with different approaches, the way someone might knock on a series of walls listening for the sound that indicates a hollow space. They release words into the air and watch for the response. The flinch tells them they found something. Defensiveness confirms it. Withdrawal confirms it differently. Over time, they learn which particular phrases reliably produce a reaction, and they return to those phrases. This is not mysterious. It is pattern recognition at the most basic level. They are responding to the signals you have been providing, which means the actual protection you need is not a sharper response or a more compelling argument. It is self-acceptance. When you have genuinely claimed your own imperfections, when you can say to yourself, with steadiness rather than shame, that you are still developing, that you fall short in certain areas, that you are not finished, those imperfections lose their power as instruments. When you have already acknowledged your vulnerabilities in your own private inventory, no one can weaponize them publicly to produce a reaction in you. The insult loses its electrical charge because there is nothing left that needs concealing. This is not a case for complacency or for abandoning growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if someone demonstrates a mistake in his thinking or conduct, he welcomes the correction. That is the posture, the willingness to encounter your own limitations without being collapsed by them. Where criticism carries something true, you take it in and address it from within yourself. Where it carries nothing true, you allow it to pass without resistance. In either case, your foundation remains intact. What others say becomes information that you assess, not identity that you absorb. Jung said that the most genuinely difficult act available to a person is complete self-acceptance. That acceptance is not arrogance. It is integration. You are not a collection of only your strengths. You are also your fears, your recurring patterns, your mistakes, the places where you have not yet arrived. When you deny those elements, you make them into vulnerabilities. When you acknowledge them and carry them honestly, you make them into solid ground. The more integrated you become, the less reactive you are to what others say about you. The insult that previously shook your sense of self now registers as something predictable, something that touches the surface without breaking through. Epictetus taught that the freedom which matters begins in the mind, that what is within your power is your own judgment about your own worth. If you allow your value to be determined by the emotional state of whoever is speaking to you, your stability will be perpetually borrowed from external conditions. When you anchor your sense of value in your own conduct, your effort, the principles you actually hold and act from, the opinions of others lose their authority. You stop pursuing their approval as a measure of your standing. You stop organizing your behavior around the fear of their rejection. You begin operating from a self-assessment that does not require outside confirmation to remain in place. Seneca wrote that the person who is angered has been conquered by the one who provoked them. The same logic applies to shame. The person who manages to make you accept shame as deserved has conquered something in you. But when you examine the shame honestly and find it to be empty, when it does not correspond to anything true about who you actually are, the attempt fails. The other person may continue speaking. The emotional damage, however, does not land. You are responding from clarity rather than reacting from a wound. And clarity, when it is genuine, does not need to perform itself. It simply holds its position. There is one internal decision that alters the entire dynamic, and it does not look dramatic from the outside. It does not involve a confrontation or a declared boundary. It takes place quietly within your own thinking. It is the decision to release the expectation that this person will become different from what they have consistently shown themselves to be. This is among the most genuinely difficult things to do, because hope does not feel like a problem. Hope feels like patience. Hope feels like the kind of steadiness that holds space for people even when they are difficult. But when hope is misplaced, when it is directed towards someone who has given you no evidence that change is coming, it stops functioning as patience and starts functioning as a chain. For as long as you carry the private belief that they will one day see clearly, apologize with full sincerity, and become the version of themselves you once glimpsed or imagined, you remain emotionally tethered to a future they may never produce. You continue explaining because you believe the next explanation will be the one that reaches them. You continue the argument because you believe this will be the time they acknowledge being wrong. You wait because you believe the version of them you once connected with will eventually reappear. That hope keeps you oriented towards something that the evidence does not support. The difficulty is not that hope itself is a problem. The difficulty is illusion. When you evaluate someone through the lens of who they might become rather than who they have consistently been, you are working from a distorted picture. You excuse patterns that have already demonstrated themselves clearly. You minimize repeated disrespect because you believe the next interaction will be different. Each time it is not, the disappointment is deeper than the last. Seneca wrote that we suffer far more in imagination than in reality. A significant portion of that suffering comes from the change we continue imagining. The apology we replay in our minds. The shift in approach we picture finally arriving. The moment of genuine recognition we have constructed in such careful detail. Reality holds steady. Expectation generates the pain. Releasing this hope is not the same as becoming bitter toward the person or toward people in general. It is the act of seeing with greater accuracy. It is looking at the person in front of you and acknowledging without anger and without dramatization that this is who they are right now. You do not attach additional significance to that acknowledgement. You do not construct a narrative of grievance around it. You simply allow it to be true. Marcus Aurelius prepared himself each morning by reminding himself of the range of human behavior he would encounter. People who would be difficult, thoughtless, ungrateful, dishonest. He did not write those reminders in order to develop contempt. He wrote them in order to arrive at his day with accurate expectations. When you know there is a possibility of rain, you bring what you need. You do not stand in the open demanding sunshine. That shift changes your posture fundamentally. For as long as you expect fairness from someone who has consistently provided its opposite, you keep attempting to educate them, presenting evidence, making arguments, trying to bring them around to your position. Once you release the expectation that they will function according to your standards, you stop trying to produce a conversion. You adjust what you do instead. You manage the access they have to your time and attention. You reduce what you invest emotionally. You respond to what they actually do, not to what they have promised. The energy previously spent trying to reform them returns to your own life. There is a genuine grief that accompanies this decision. It can feel like surrender, but it is not surrendering yourself. It is surrendering an illusion that was protecting itself at your expense. Jung wrote that a person does not arrive at wisdom by imagining only what is bright, but by making what is dark into something conscious. When you see clearly who someone is, including the ways they are limited, you are not passing a verdict against them. You are simply no longer in denial about what the evidence shows. Denial sustains vulnerability. Clarity protects. The moment you accept the pattern as real, you stop being surprised each time it repeats. Epictetus taught that freedom becomes accessible the moment you clearly separate what belongs to your control from what does not. Another person's character is not within your governance. Their capacity for growth, their willingness to take responsibility, the accountability they do or do not demonstrate, none of this belongs to you. What belongs to you is your own response to each situation as it arrives. When you release the expectation that they will change, you free yourself from the cycle that disappointment creates and recreates. You stop measuring your own progress by improvements in their conduct. You measure it by the steadiness of your own. Once this internal decision is genuinely made, something practical begins to follow. You become selective about what you offer, not hostile, not theatrical, simply selective. You begin to recognize that your attention, your time, your genuine warmth, and the parts of yourself that are most vulnerable are not in unlimited supply. They are assets of real value. And assets of real value do not belong in the hands of someone who has demonstrated they will treat them carelessly. For a long time you may have given freely, operating under the belief that sustained generosity would eventually create a foundation of mutual respect. But generosity without reciprocity eventually becomes depletion. So you adjust. The adjustment does not announce itself. When someone has treated you with disrespect, what they can access changes. Conversations become shorter. Engagement becomes transactional rather than personal. You address what requires addressing and nothing more. You remain civil, but you are no longer emotionally present in the way you once were. Calm, but no longer open. You similarly stop offering the stories, thoughts, and details about your inner life that can be distorted or minimized. This is not withdrawal out of coldness. It is adjustment based on what the situation has actually shown you. Connection that deserves depth requires mutual regard. When that regard is absent, the depth adjusts accordingly. This will feel uncomfortable at first. You may worry that you are being somehow unkind or unnecessarily distant. But there is a meaningful distinction between generosity and overexposure. When you know your own limits clearly, you protect them. You stop extending the most vulnerable parts of yourself to people who have shown they treat such offerings carelessly. This is responsibility, not retaliation. You are accountable for the standards you uphold and for where you direct your energy. The difference between protection and punishment is interior, but it is real. Punishment looks for the other person to suffer. Protection looks to preserve yourself. From the outside, both can look similar. Access decreases in either case. But the intent shapes everything, including how you carry it. When the motivation is protection rather than punishment, your manner stays steady. No bitterness enters the tone. No explanation is required. You simply align your behavior with what the situation actually calls for. You engage at whatever depth feels genuine and respectful, and no deeper. Here is what often happens when this shift takes hold. People who were accustomed to producing reactions from you gradually realize that the dynamic has changed. The provocations no longer generate what they were designed to generate. The jokes fall flat. The accusations do not spark the extended debates they once produced. Some people, having lost the reaction that gave the behavior its purpose, quietly redirect their energy elsewhere, towards someone who still provides what they are looking for. Others shift into something that resembles respect, not necessarily warmth, not admiration, but a recognition that your limits are no longer a performance. They are simply where you stand. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the most meaningful response to difficult people is not to mirror them. You do not require force or volume or the threat of consequence. You simply decline to reflect the behavior placed in front of you. When someone senses that their approach no longer generates the expected emotional result, the dynamic registers as genuinely changed, even if no confrontation occurred and no declaration was made. Jung observed that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. When you stop negotiating your own dignity, you move measurably closer to that person. You stop contracting yourself to preserve someone else's comfort. You stop expanding yourself to secure someone else's approval. You occupy the shape that is actually yours. That is felt by people around you, even when it is not praised, and even when it is not named. Seneca wrote that we should seek the company of people who have the capacity to improve us. Selectivity in where you direct your energy moves naturally in that direction. As you withdraw from exchanges that exhaust without returning anything of value, space opens. Space for connections that carry genuine reciprocity. Space for your own development to continue. Space for the experience of calm as a consistent condition rather than an occasional visitor. What the absence of constant friction reveals is how much noise you had already accepted as ordinary. Peace begins to feel like your natural state rather than a brief reprieve between disturbances. This is how the internal decision expresses itself outwardly. Not as an announcement, not as an argument, not as a declaration of any kind. Simply as a way of living. Interactions shift. What you offer shifts. What you expect shifts. And over time, the entire pattern around you reshapes itself according to the steadiness you have built inside. Some connections will fade. Others will stabilize at a more honest level. Either way, you are no longer operating from the need to be approved of or from the fear of what disapproval costs you. You are simply decided. The day you stop defending your worth is the day your life becomes noticeably quieter. Not because the people around you have suddenly become more considerate, because you have become genuinely unshakable. You are no longer negotiating your own dignity in each exchange. You are no longer orienting your responses around each new provocation. You are standing in something that was built slowly and held steadily. And when you hold that position long enough, the noise around you loses its ability to locate you. If this reached something real in you, there is another video on your screen that goes deeper into building exactly this kind of interior strength. Watch that next. Keep working on your mind. Keep building your character.